I, 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 He got fired from Kane, now we ain't got no shame. So we started a pod, took Yates into town.
Hey everybody, welcome to Chuck Yates Needs a Job, the podcast. And in a first, I am taking a virginity. Is this true? Is this true?
It is true.
My guest is Kelly Mitchell. Kelly, your first podcast?
My first podcast.
Oh my gosh.
Be nice. Be gentle.
Yes, ma'am. Of course. No, so you're really cool to come on. And I'm going to preface this by saying I absolutely adore you. I think you're one of the coolest people in the world. We've chatted on the phone multiple times.
Yep.
We text. This is our first time ever meeting in person. Do you want to tell the story of how we met or you want me to?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I can try and see if your version's the same. But I think it was after maybe your podcast with Ashley Watt or with Sarah talking about, the issues that were going on in Antina. And I was like, hey, this is an oil and gas guy, but he seems to be pretty honest about some of the issues with the industry. I saw you were getting a lot of flack on Twitter at the time. So I reached out in the DM and I was basically like, look, I am a left-wing climate activism gay. I was like, just checking all the boxes for the last people to be Digital Wildcatters fans. But I want to talk. And you responded, which was very nice. And yeah, we've been hanging out on the phone since.
Yeah, it was funny because I think when you sent that DM, I was driving to Telluride the next day.
Yeah.
And you're like, hey, can we talk on the phone sometime? And I'm like, yeah, I have, 18 hours in the
Yep.
car. Feel free to call whenever. So we did it. And so tell me background.
Yeah.
What have you done in your career? Because you were telling me a little bit earlier and it was cool.
Yeah. So I started working on climate stuff when I graduated from college around 2006. So I worked for Green.
Where'd you go to college?
I went to UPenn.
Oh, cool.
And all of my
College
friends,
Station?
No, in Philly, the University of Pennsylvania.
Gotcha.
And yeah, all my friends were going into...
Did I just accuse you of going to Penn State?
Yeah, you did just... And I live in Ann Arbor right now, too.
Oh,
so
my gosh.
Got Big Ten rivals.
Anyway, sorry about that.
Friends were going into investment banking, into consulting, into all the things you go to a ridiculously overpriced private university to do. And I took like a $30,000 job working for Greenpeace out of college. So I worked there for about 11 or 12 years, all on climate issues. I did the... Did
you scale, ships and bridges and hang stuff? Really?
I scaled a smokestack in Chicago. So one of the oldest coal-fired power plants in the country was right in downtown Chicago. So along with a group of 7 other people, we occupied the coal plant. We scaled the smokestack. We stayed up there a couple of days. They did close the facility pretty soon after, so hopefully we played some small role in that. But yeah, no, I've done the activism stuff. I've been arrested.
Oh, that's awesome.
I've been to jail. I've been to Cook County jail.
Hard time? You've done hard time?
No, I've not done hard time. I've done easy. I mean, look at me. I've done easy time. People like me don't do hard time in this country. But yeah, no, I was full on in the activism space for, a good long stretch. And then in recent years, I kind of switch gears a little bit. So now I work for an organization that's much, much closer to investigative journalism. So a little more kind of neutral, a little more about the facts, but we're out there doing original investigations into basically misdeeds in the oil and gas industry, political influence by corporations. It's my little spiel.
So tell me something that I would be surprised to hear about Greenpeace activists. If that's a fair question.
Yeah. It's a good question. I think we hopefully are a lot more down to earth than maybe people would expect. I think there's somewhat of a sense that we're all kind of wrapped up into this climate change religion that we practice with quite a lot of intensity. And I think you'll find, within the Greenpeace activism community, there are a lot of people who are wrestling with really difficult questions, who understand the scale of the problem we're facing. They understand the significance of oil and gas into our current way of life, but are still nonetheless kind of looking for solutions that kind of ease the burden of the transition on the greatest number of people. So, a lot more, I don't know, hopefully a lot more sort of humor and levity than maybe you may find among, the people that you see online. I would hope so, at least.
No, I like that. Because I would not have thought barrel of laughs when I thought Greenpeace, but no, that's cool. So the thing I always like is whenever we talk, I'm always like, hey, what are your people saying? And you're always well, what are your people? What are your people saying, Jack? Do you think, because my issue is, I've said it on the podcast, is we ignore global warming at our own peril.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, and I believe that's true. And I've always been a data guy, so kind of look at data type stuff. I believe we ignore that kind of at our own peril. The thing I've always struggled with, and you and I've talked a little bit about this offline, is you always hear the science says this, right? And I've always thought that the observation of the event or the data, anybody ought to be able to see. Now, we need Newton to explain the theory of gravity, but we can all see the apple fall off the tree. I'll give you another example. You're sick, you go to the doctor. Okay, you need the doctor to tell you have an infection of your spleen or whatever the case may be, but you can still feel it. And so one of the things I had asked you about was, shouldn't we be able to, in the data, just see global warming? And so I printed these out.
Yeah.
Give me two. I printed out double copies.
Oh, great.
So if this is okay, we'll go
This is really good audio content, explaining charts for
your... We do have cameras.
No, I'm just kidding.
So actually, that's a good point. But basically what chart number one is, and I'll go this red line here, and we'll cut these into the YouTube. Yeah. But when you look at this red line over here.
Yeah. Which one? This top one. Okay.
This top one. Because these are the two charts that I've always seen when it's the last 10,000 years worth of temperature. And I've always thought, like, supposedly the ice science on this was pretty well accepted by everybody. You go do an ice core and it gives you the temperatures and the like. What I've always seen about these charts is, number one, like 91% of the time it's been warmer over the last 10,000 years than it has been now. I called you and you actually said, yeah, that may be true, but it's the slope. It's the increase that we've seen kind of since, call it 1850 or whatever. That's the problem. But then I kind of look at that line and I go, well, there have been slopes that steep over the last 10,000 years. And the other chart below this that will pop up too, basically the same kind of thing.
Yeah.
What am I missing on these charts?
Yeah, so there's we're looking at two sets of charts here, which hopefully we can have up. So the charts here that you're talking about, these are charts that are pretty widely circulated. And maybe I'll just start by saying, like, I'm not a climate scientist, so I'll do my best to kind of represent my understanding of
your
this stuff.
People. You'll represent your
I'll
people.
represent my people.
I will ask the questions of my people.
But is that the sort of problem with these two sets of charts is they don't actually represent the sort of like abundance of data in climate science that are taking place. These charts are basically from a single set of ice core samples in northern Greenland. So they show a lot more kind of fluctuation, highs and lows, than we actually saw when we're looking at sort of a global scale, because it's a really narrow sample. So I think these charts are sort of cherry-picked at times to make the point that maybe the warming that we're seeing right now is not as dramatic or as scary as it should.
Or driven by
human activity or whatever you want to call it. There's another set of charts that I think I sent you these as well.
Okay, now we're gonna have
the blue charts, the fuzzy blue charts.
Fuzzy blue charts. Okay.
Now these represent science. Some of it coming out of University of Arizona, but they represent, I think, the much broader view of sampling. So ice cores from multiple locations, modeling from multiple locations. And here, the impact of humans on global temperature rise, suddenly becomes a lot more severe, where you see that over the past 10,000 years, we've been in a period of extreme kind of climate stability, actually, as a species. So one of the reasons that we've been able to thrive and prosper and have predictable agriculture and all the things that we've needed to get to where we are as a species. And then you have to scroll all the way to the far end of these charts to see just a huge spike in temperature change that, if we were to overlay a chart of CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere, you would see the impact of human activity much more aggressively. Yeah.
Gotcha. So how the two sides, do they fight about this and we don't really have a common set of data? Is kind of the one side sitting there saying, well, this is all based on modeling and modeling's never right, and we don't even have enough computing power to be able to predict these models, et cetera. Is that kind of the fight, or do you know?
Yeah, I mean, my sense is that within the scientific community, there's not much of a fight. So I'll never say, I think the triggering word for a lot of people is like, the science is settled. I'm not going to say that. No science is ever settled. But within the climate community, within the science community as a whole, you have the, vast majority, 90+% of scientists who are looking at, the fuzzy blue chart model and saying climate change is happening. And we know the largest driver at the moment is human activity. So now the question is, what do we do about it? And then you have a smaller subset of scientists who are looking at this data and maybe cherry picking examples here, like the red and blue chart we're looking at, or looking for other places where there's some, slices of uncertainty here and slices of uncertainty there to say, okay, maybe we can pump the brakes on actually doing anything about this problem. So I think, to whatever extent there is that debate, it's very weighted towards one side of the equation.
Okay, because that's one of the things I've told myself I want to actually go deep dive.
Yeah.
And just actually figure out how good is our data, because it's wild. I mean, you can literally have two people tweet out, the ice in the Arctic is shrinking, and then somebody else is like, no, it's bigger, and they both put pictures in, and you're like going, this shouldn't be in debate. You know, I mean, but.
Well, let me tell you a story about the debate. So this might be a long diatribe, but so I was born in 1984. Now, by that time, Exxon had already been publishing internal papers for years saying climate change is happening and it could have, in their words, catastrophic impacts. A few years after I was born, Shell was publishing studies internally, not just whether or not climate change was happening, but actually trying to calculate, like, to the percentage point, what percentage of global warming is Shell responsible for. That's what they're doing in 1988, right? It's 2023. I am here. I've got 2 kids. I've got some gray hairs. I'm talking to an internet friend. And we're still having this sort of like discussion about, is the science real? And the only thing that's changed in that 40-ish year period is that the science has become more robust, it's become more precise, and it's become, clearer that humans are responsible. And so it's a weird journey that we can have, this like 40-year-long period where everyone from, engineers at Exxon to the best scientists in the world are saying like, man, we got to do something about it. But then the dialogue is still, like you said, it's this back and forth, equally weighted Twitter, exchange of people sharing pictures of a, Antarctic ice sheet and trying to figure out what's going on. So I don't know how to, especially with quote your side of the aisle, like how to bridge that divide. Like, how do we get to the place where we can all say like, yeah, this is happening. And so the question is, what role is the oil and gas industry is going to play in it? What role are NGOs going to play with it? What role is government going to play? Versus considering to be like, well, is this even a thing we need to, be concerned about?
Yeah. No,
there's my soapbox.
No, yeah. I like the soapbox. I'm glad to hear that. As my friend David Ramsden Woods says, man, if we could only raise the temperature 5 degrees on this planet, Canada would be bearable. But so it's interesting you bring that up, because like I said, you ignore this at your own peril. And I really am going to go deep dive into the science
Yeah,
because
yeah.
I do want to figure out, is this actually happening? To what degree is it happening? And I think what the answer is going to be, and I hate to predispose this, is it's going to be, well, it's fuzzy. And
Mm-hmm.
so, if we could all live with, hey, this is fuzzy, which kind of seems where we are right now, you still need to have the conversation about, okay, one side says we need to stop hydrocarbons by this date.
Yep.
And I think the answer back is, okay, how are we going to get Africa to do that? How are we
Mhm.
going to get China to do that? How are we going to get India to do that? Because as I like to say on the podcast, there's really not a peeing and non-peeing part of the pool.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And the do you have any suggestions from your side how we have that discussion?
The global discussion or
Or
just
just
the like.
Yeah, because I will say I will say what my people
Yeah.
will say is
Yeah.
all they want to do is shut it down, and all they want to do is just shut down hydrocarbons. But at the same time, John Kerry's still going to fly around on his jet, so it's
Yeah.
rules for thee, not for me.
Yeah.
That which it feels like, and at the end of the day, I do think the developing world has a bit of a point of, hey, you guys are driving around in Lambos and you get to go see Post Malone in concert and all of this while I'm over here,
Yeah.
in this tent burning dung for fuel. So
Sure. Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's a good discussion. Like, I think one of the first conversations we had, I was pretty clear. I'm like, I drive a giant SUV. Like, I got to come out here like 8 Mile style and like self docs, right? Like the shirt was like NGLs at some point. You know what I mean? Like, I think I am well aware. I think you'll find a lot of people in the climate space are very well aware of like how dependent we are. And I think, one thing our side could do is be able to have the honesty to say like, for like billions of people, maybe on this planet, like fossil fuels have enabled certain lifestyles. Like it has helped to extend life. It's helped to make people more comfortable. It's helped to make people safer. Like, I don't think we can deny the fact that like fossil fuels have been a great benefit to a lot of people. Now, if we don't start rating it,
hold on.
Yes.
I hope your wife doesn't get offended, but my crush on you even grew more right there. Okay, keep going.
Done.
Sorry. Okay.
This Chuck just brought me here. The Chuck wife Chuck Yates needs a wife podcast ends with me walking down the aisle. But no, I mean, I will say that with sincerity because I think if we just completely throw that by the wayside or deny that, then we're not being honest. And so we can say that yes, fossil fuels have benefited a lot of people. There's a lot of people. It's also shortened the life of. I mean, I think some of the direct emissions from burning these products have created massive problems with air quality and water quality that we've taken a lot of steps to improve in the U.S., but still continue to persist in a lot of parts of the world. And then obviously, if we don't address climate change, there's like the big catastrophe around the corner. And so I don't think the solution is just to say like, yeah, we're going to get rid of all oil and gas, starting tomorrow. Everyone has to live in caves. Everyone has to, stop enjoying the things that they enjoy. I think, but the reality is that because we've debated the science for so long, because the oil and gas industry has until very recently really resisted being part of the solution, we didn't get to start making that transition in, let's say, the 80s and the 90s when the science was becoming abundantly clear. We're making the transition now. And so that is going to just have to force a lot, steeper cuts in emissions. It's going to force us to take oil and gas out of the system a lot faster than I think we otherwise would have had to.
So what I would think, because we talk around here that you can say, oh, big bad government's imposing stuff on it. This is actually being consumer led. I mean, my kids, they would vote tomorrow to get rid of oil and gas. I always tell them, just stop using it and it would go away, but they don't seem to like that answer. But
how much oil and gas are your kids using?
As much as any other American kid, Daddy, drive me here.
Yeah.
Daddy, I'm going to the car, But anyway, I think so this is being driven by consumers, customers, companies, etc. And I think the path forward actually needs to be, instead of absolutes, it needs to be relatives. So, look, I get it. Greenpeace does not want a natural gas pipeline from Pennsylvania or Ohio or West Virginia, anywhere in the Appalachian Basin, to go to Massachusetts.
Mhm.
So they're not going to let you go across New York. They're not going to do it. We had a day, in the winter where half of the heating in Massachusetts was fuel oil.
Yeah.
And we can all agree fuel oil is nasty.
Yeah.
I mean, even pro oil guys, like, I don't want to burn fuel oil in my backyard. And it seems like, unfortunately, both sides fight on the absolutes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, no, we're not going to do that. And this side fights over here, where it would be nice if we could just make relative trade-offs that got it somewhat better. Because, I mean, we have, we've done whatever we've done to the population in the United States, but we have reduced emissions, and that's all been natural gas kicking coal off the system.
Yeah. Well, a couple things. Yeah. I mean, on the Northeast stuff, yeah, it's interesting. I think the question for us is like, what choices are we locking in now for the next, 10, 20, 30 years? So building that pipeline to Massachusetts is going to lock in a ton of new natural gas into that system. Everyone who was involved in building that pipeline and supplying the gas has a huge incentive to make sure that there are never any new policies in Massachusetts that incentivize renewable energy or heat pumps or anything that's going to get people off natural gas. Whereas, if we took that moment, which, totally agree, no one needs to be burning fuel oil in the United States in 2023. But if that in turn ended up being, a big change in heat pump technology or other, solutions that you could have, which then lock us into a very different path for the next 10, 20, 30 years, I think that's where those changes start to become really significant.
I don't know that I ever actually appreciated that point, because in my mind, it's so obvious that we're going to sit there and we're going to burn every hydrocarbon on the planet before it's over with. Somebody is, right? I mean, just because at the end of the day, it really is the cheaper fuel source. I mean,
for now,
and
in some places, I mean, that's changing, but
So I don't know that I'd actually appreciated that point. So that's kind of good to hear. But no, it's just ridiculous that we're importing LNG into Massachusetts from Trinidad. First off, we could have sent that to Europe and helped deal with Putin. Yeah. Two, the diesel we burn in the ships to
get it there,
not good either.
Yeah.
Plus, it kills the whales. I've told you my whales story, haven't I?
No, I want to hear your whale story.
Okay, so here's the deal.
Okay.
We've all figured out there's an amazing technology God gave us to get rid of CO2 in the air. It's called the tree, right?
Mm-hmm.
Almost equally as good as the whale, because the whale actually winds up sequestering 30, 35 tons of carbon. And when it dies, it just goes to the bottom of the ocean, right?
Yeah.
The other thing is they're figuring out that about 40% of photosynthesis on the planet is done by plankton.
Yep.
You know what the greatest environment for plankton is? Whale shit. I mean, it really is. Yeah. And I would actually say that potentially, CO2 levels going up and, temperature following, it also inversely correlates to us having about 5 to 6 million whales on the planet, down to we got 1.2 whales on the planet now too. And unfortunately, all these ships running around in the ocean are what kill baby whales.
Yeah.
Because they find ships very fascinating. And they go over and they talk to the ship and they usually lose that.
Yeah.
And boom, before they can. So making whales have sex is kind of my mission.
That's your big, agenda here.
I'm gonna
Chuck Yates 2024 whales having sex. No, I mean, the ocean stuff is interesting. And again, this is where I start to get maybe out of my depth on some of the climate science stuff.
I was totally out of my depth on the whale thing. But
you're not an actual whale scientist?
I'm not an actual whale scientist.
Yeah, but
I read an article.
That's sort of the other side of all of this is like one of the biggest sequestering bodies in addition to trees of carbon is the ocean. The ocean's sucking up massive amounts of carbon. Absent the ocean, we'd have CO2 levels that were way higher than we're experiencing now. The problem is that when the ocean sequesters that carbon, it's sort of like, this energy drink. It makes it incredibly acidic. And so one of the problems we're seeing right now, which you don't even need fancy climate models to detect, you can go and just take measurements, is that ocean acidity is kind of going through the roof as the ocean's absorbing more and more carbon. That's leading to problems like coral reefs dying off. I think I told you environmentalists were like fun, and now I'm telling you all the terrible things. But coral reefs are dying off, and that starts to impact when you really get down to a little level, less the sort of plankton, but those super tiny, animal, I don't know,
microbes or something.
But some of them have kind of like a harder sort of shell,
right.
And the acidity of the oceans is breaking that down, So it's really cutting out the very bottom of the food chain for a lot of the oceans as a result of ocean acidification, which is going to hurt your beautiful whales. They're not going to want to have sex if they're hungry. So,
Fair enough. Fair enough. It's interesting how, this is all tied together. And, one of the biggest things we could actually do is dam up 9 rivers in China. Because isn't that where 80% of the ocean's pollution comes from? They just throw their trash in the river and it just floats out to the ocean. So, that's interesting. So you're now this investigative journalist.
Yeah.
And don't give away any deep, dark secrets.
Yeah.
So my audience will go prepared to hide from you and all that. But what are some stories you've written, and what are some stories you're seeing?
Yeah. So one of the big things I've kind of looked at in various levels over the last couple of years is just actually stuff you've covered really beautifully on the podcast, is just the entire issue of like orphan and abandoned wells, decommissioning liabilities onshore and offshore for the oil industry. And, I think especially looking for interesting case studies of where, oil companies have abandoned properties to kind of help people kind of understand how, because I think it's such a big problem. Like there's so many millions of wells out there that it can become sort of a data story, a statistic story. So just trying to find kind of cool or interesting examples of how individual people might end up bearing the cost of the industry's orphan well problem. So,
and I think we talked about this, but I will get on my soapbox.
Yeah,
and just a little bit by the way of educating. At the end of the day, really the abandoned well issue isn't really an abandoned well issue and how well you plugged it. It's pressure, right, of forcing something up. And the Permian Basin, which is the biggest producing basin, God didn't put any pressure there. I mean, you're sucking like a fat kid on a Whataburger milkshake to get oil and gas out of the ground in the Permian Basin. And so, that's why you have the pump jacks and all that sort of stuff. That's also why you do water floods. You're injecting water, increasing the pressure, pushing it out. You do CO2 floods, same sort of thing to push it out. So I think the nuance I would be looking for are poorly abandoned wells in areas where there's pressure. And I think that's really what Ashley is fighting against on Antina Ranch. Is not that these were bad cement jobs. They probably were. Who knows? I'm not an engineer. I can't tell. It's more just that the reservoir underneath her ranch got way over injected. I mean, she's actually found the data. She's really smart and she's got money, and she went to the microfish literally back from the 80s.
That's cool.
And just found all of the injection going on there. So they just have too much pressure there. I mean, the solution to that, which it may be too late for, is they should have drilled a couple of wells, produced off as much water as they could, and trucked the water someplace else. And so it's really kind of if you don't have pressure, nothing's going to come up. So you still want a good cement job and put it all in place. But I think that's the nuance you need to be looking for.
I actually think that's really a good point. And that's probably not something I've gone as deep into, is like from basin to basin, level, where are the actual like long-term risks of this leading to contamination or methane or all the things that people are worrying about. I think we're more interested on just the corporate level about how there's a little bit of like a moral hazard problem kind of being created now, where states and now the federal government are basically saying like, look, at the end of the day, if you go belly up, if you decide to just not deal with your long-term liabilities, like we're going to have cash available to plug that well. And, you know, a lot of that has, you know, happened with much smaller operators. So folks that, you know, went bankrupt in the last shale boom and bust. I don't know what, you know, Exxon and Chevron and, you know, Occidental are going to do in the long term, but you do see, you know, small examples of them challenging decommissioning orders, you know, off the California coast, off the Gulf Coast, and you start to just get a sense that, you know, 20, 30, 40 years from now, are these companies really going to put their money where their mouth is and take care of these properties? And if so, what does that look like? And if not, is that me and you then, you know, footing that bill in the long term?
You know who I honestly think ought to pay a lot of it is Amazon. I mean, we had no. In all seriousness, hear me out.
Okay,
on this.
no,
Hear me out on this. So, you know, we had the shale revolution. We doubled oil production in America after 30 some odd years of decline. We had cheap oil. I mean, I got fired shortly after minus $37 oil.
That's right. Which you caused, I think, right? That's what I heard.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, it was all me, just in case. We're letting you go because of performance. Minus 37? What? Anyway, no need to go there. Well,
yeah.
But anyway, so they had, I mean, all those vans are running around because they had cheap energy. And Amazon made a lot of money during that period. And so at least part of the benefactor of cheap oil was Amazon. So, you know, I've always kind of said, yes, the oil and gas company needs to do it, but they also had record losses there for 10 years. Shouldn't the consumers pitch in on that?
Yeah.
You know?
Well, they're going to, right? Like it's going to be Amazon consumers via their role as a U.S. taxpayer who do end up footing that bill. Like, you know, so your dream may come true, except it's not going to hurt Jeff Bezos.
The libertarian.
It's going to hurt me.
Yeah, the libertarian in me is just like, oh gosh. Right. But no, that's fair. So what else are you seeing out there?
Other big thing we're tracking right now is just this whole like ESG boogeyman. I don't know how much, you know, you guys have followed it or talked about it at all, but just, you know, right now there's like 30 something states that are pursuing legislation that would punish, you know, BlackRock and State Street for considering ESG, that would ban, you know, pension funds from, you know, having any environmental criteria in their fund selection. So we've done a lot of work on that issue in particular, especially just trying to go one or two layers back of like, who are the groups that have kind of put this idea into the zeitgeist, who's funding them, what are they, you know, how are they actually wielding influence within states and within the federal government as these proposals are being considered. So it's been a big, big reporting project, like tens of thousands of like, you know, government documents, but it's been a fun one.
So fan of Biden vetoing the legislation, I'm assuming?
Yeah, I think I'm a fan of it.
Okay, well, just checking. I didn't want to be presumptuous, but...
I mean, at the end of the day, you know, ESG is two things, right? It's both a thing that is like very much, I think, wanted by consumers. I think especially like younger generation folks, like they want to know what the risks are of their company's investments. They, you know, want to know that their company isn't using like child slave labor, that they have an independent board of directors, that they're not burning trash outside their headquarters for fun. And it's also like completely meaningless right now. Like there's no legal standard for ESG. So like, you know, we could say this is like an ESG podcast because you like printed this on recycled paper. I mean, and then you could not even use real recycled paper because no one would care, no one would check. So the whole thing's just very funny to me that like there's been such a political like fracas about ESG when at the end of the day, like at least as the rules are considered right now, like it's either going to be positive because it's going to give investors and consumers better information, or it's going to be kind of a nothing burger because there's not any existing standards to dictate like what ESG means.
Yeah, it kind of feels like the whole organic debate, you know, I mean, I guess now we've kind of at least got some sort of definition around what organic products actually are. But early days, I mean, it was just you slapped it on the product just so you could say you did it.
I mean, oil companies love ESG. I mean, I'm at this conference right now, but you read their investor reports, you go look at their proxies that are coming out this year, and the whole thing is like a love note to ESG. Like they're all, oh, we now tie 25% of our, you know, managers' compensation to ESG metrics, and we're doing this net zero thing. And they talk about how, like, in a lot of cases, it's actually enabled them to get more money on better terms when they, have a plan in place to reduce methane emissions. So, it's actually, I think, overall probably been quite good for the oil and gas sector to be able to have this ESG branding. And yet you go into the states and they're, these state legislators who are, creating these bills or talking about how, like, the existence of an ESG label is, like, the only reason, like, the oil industry didn't perform throughout the 2010s, 2020s, so.
I know, we fucked it up.
Yeah, no, that was all your fault. You drilled too much oil.
We were too good. I mean, that actually was the problem.
Right?
I mean, we were too good.
Yeah.
So this is interesting because when the SEC is going to make us disclose all our emissions and all, I mean, oil and gas people just cringed at that. Oh my gosh. I actually think that's going to be really good for us because we actually don't in the production of oil and gas. We don't, in the way of emissions, do that much. It's the use of the product. So I think we're going to wind up looking good. Amazon and all the vans and United Airlines flying the planes around. It's going to shine a spotlight on. It actually is consuming. That's the issue. It's not us. I mean, we in the grand scheme of things have done a really nice job of, there are exceptions, but, have done a nice job of kind of cleaning up.
Yeah. No, I think the SEC role will be very good. I mean, we'll see what they end up including in that. I think similar to ESG, it kind of gets hyped up as this thing that's going to, destroy America if companies have to report on their emissions. But
anything the government does destroys America,
exactly.
Coming from the libertarian.
Exactly.
But keep going.
Unless it's paying billions of dollars to clean up the industry's wells, in which case.
No,
but I mean, I think it would be a very good thing for the industry. It would actually, it would allow some differentiation between, like, operators. I think the EU is going to be way ahead of the US anyway on these kinds of reporting standards. So, like, really, like, US companies should just be, like, completely on board to get this SEC rule in place and to get their data systems in place to be able to do it, because they're going to have to do way more stringent reporting in the EU, whether they like it or not. But no, I think it'll be a good tool for, everybody involved. So I totally agree with you.
Well, and I don't know that it'll be a good tool. It's being forced upon us. There's nothing we can do about it. That being said, I would get out in front of it. If I was an energy company, I'd get my systems in place, because one of the things, and I don't want to speak ill of my former investors. I love all my former LPs, but you asked them, okay, what does ESG mean? And kind of get these blank stares on, and I always use the joke. I think it was Justice Potter that in his famous Supreme Court decision on pornography, I know it when I see it. You kind of got that of, well, I'll know it when I see it. And so there was not a lot of direction in terms of what that actually means. And, everybody in the energy business was like, oh, well, that's horrible, all this. I was like, that's the greatest thing on the planet, because you get to define it.
Yeah.
Go in and say, well, it's obvious that it means X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
And just treat it as a fact. And I thought we should have been way more proactive about it, because it was going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. No, yeah, it's coming. I mean, I think a lot of, operators, a lot of the majors have tried to do that and embrace it and say, it's net zero. So that means it's carbon capture. It means it's direct air capture. It means it's reducing scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. I think other operators have fought it. So I think it'll be interesting to see, like, as we actually get some, like, legal definitions around ESG once we get actually some reporting guidelines in from SEC, like, how that sort of changes the whole landscape. But I'll just say again, I think you see in the filings, there's so much resistance from the oil and gas industry on the data side, where they're saying, look, there's no way we could possibly calculate, maybe we can calculate scope 1 and scope 2. There's no way we can calculate scope 3 emissions. And yet, going back to my other point, Shell was doing that in 1988. They were calculating their scope 3 emissions. So it's not, it's not an impossible task for industry. There just needs to be the commitment to do it.
Well, I think here's kind of the issue from my people is, okay, yes, we can go do it. It's going to raise our costs. It's going to put our companies in jeopardy. And oh, by the way, John Kerry's still going to get gasoline from Saudi Arabia or Venezuela and these people not doing it,
Yeah.
and we're going to be out of business.
Yeah.
That I think is a fair argument back of, hey, because we are doing it cleaner than the rest of the world. You know, I mean, us in Canada do it really well in terms of being clean. And if the flip side was, as long as we're going to use this stuff, we might as well make it happen here, and let's go put Venezuela, Saudi Arabia, and the other folks out of business, I think you would have more buy-in. But unfortunately, it's, hey, we're going to get rid of y'all, but we're going to use the same barrel, and they're dirtier in other places of the world.
I think the thing for me on like the whole is it supply, is it demand question is that like it assumes the U.S. oil and gas industry is just an economic actor, and they've never just been an economic actor. Like, especially when you talk about the super majors, you know, they're not just doing a business, right? They have some, or have had at least some of the most sophisticated, you know, lobbying, advertisement, front group, political machines that any industry has ever had in American history. And so they're not just producing oil and producing oil cleaner or dirtier for customers who want it or don't. They've also worked to set the political, you know, stage so that as a country, like we've moved much more slowly than we otherwise would have towards electric vehicles and renewables and things that would actually like reduce demand. So I think when the oil industry says, oh, it's just the consumer, like we are just supplying a demand, there's a way in which they've also created the demand by suppressing alternatives over the last 10, 20, 30 years. And so, you know, I'm not saying that means, you know, we need to get rid of Exxon tomorrow, but I think it does mean that we have to realize like they're not just operating as a business in this country either.
Okay. Can I put my tinfoil hat on
Put it
about
on.
electric vehicles? Okay. So we know the carbon footprint of an internal combustion engine, right? We've been building those things for 125 years. We can measure it to the nth degree, exactly what I don't think anybody disputes those numbers. Everybody agrees on what that is. Do we truly know the carbon footprint of an electric vehicle? And I think the answer to that is not really, but Volvo actually did a deep dive on it, and they put it on their website. You can go volvo.com, pull it up. And the punchline to their report, and I tried to read it one night, and I used it to fall asleep for about a month. I never really got through it. But the punchline is dependent on how you're generating the electricity, the fuel source, it's anywhere from like 70,000 miles to 90,000 miles. I think 90,000 miles is, you know, worldwide average of electrical generation, and maybe 70,000 miles is Europe, because Europe generally has more renewables than we do. Right?
Is that sort of before it has a better emissions profile than a internal combustion? Is that
it's the breakover point.
Okay, yeah.
And I think they've been all encompassing, and they've gone, all right, you need these special metals, so you're burning diesel, because unfortunately in the middle of the Congo you can't plug into an electric socket. You burn diesel to mine, and I think they, as best I can tell, and from people I respect, they say they've done a pretty good job. So 70,000 to 90,000 miles, most cars run more than that. So it is better.
Yeah.
So electric, but is it worth trillions and trillions of dollars for that increment better? Because what we did in the IRA is historically the U.S. government with its big bully club would say, we want this, but it would let the market go figure things out. The IRA actually came in and said, no, we want electric vehicles, period. We're going to give credits for it and all this. Didn't say, hey, if you can make gasoline out of natural gas and the emissions are less, we'll give you the same credits. They went, no, it's electric vehicles. Here's why I think they did it. This is the tinfoil hat.
Yeah. I want to hear it.
So here's why they've done it. If you switch from internal combustion engines, how do we pay taxes right now? We pay taxes cents per gallon when we buy our gasoline, right?
Yep.
You go fill up, the state does it, the federal government does it, that's their money. They don't know where we drive. When we go to electric vehicles and there's no longer cents per gallon of gasoline, they're going to come out and say, well, we need to tax you. And the most obvious, easiest way to tax you is per mile driven. That would make sense. Everybody would kind of go, okay. Oh, by the way, guess what we're going to need to do? We need to track you so we can follow the miles driven. And I know they track
I was
us.
going to say, they're already tracking me right now.
But at least at this point, they've got to go get a judge order before they go where Chuck Yates did. And not that our judges are robust in the defense of my civil liberties, but a judge has to sign off on it.
Yeah.
They are going to normalize having a tracker in your car so that they can follow wherever we go. And that's why they've gone all in. And in the IRA, there's actually a $25 million pilot program for trackers.
For trackers?
Yes. That is why we're doing electric vehicles.
You figured it out, man.
It's not that much better for the environment.
You know, I have no comment on the tracker thing, but I'm going to look forward to watching some great YouTube videos about that later tonight. But yeah, I mean, on the EV thing, I'll be totally honest. Like, I don't know the math. Some of the studies I'm recalling shows there's some better gains than that, but I trust that the one you read is legit.
Well, and it was Volvo, and they published it. And I don't know if it's right or wrong.
Yeah.
And I drove I'm pro electric vehicles. I drove a Tesla for 6 years. It was a badass car.
Cool
I mean,
cars,
my kids are still like, Daddy, I miss the Tesla.
Yeah.
It was really cool and all. My whole problem is we just haven't had the discussion about it. Because I mean, at the end of the day, I think the issue, and you and I have talked about this. The issue I really have is we just can't have a thoughtful discussion about it. Because I'm not opposed to electric vehicles. I'm just like, do we go trillions of dollars on that, or do we give that trillions of dollars to India and say, please don't build any more coal plants. We'll send you as much natural gas as you want. And here's $1 trillion to go build your infrastructure. I actually think that might be a better approach.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like we can have that discussion. Not me and you, but just globally.
No, I mean, I think that's true to the discussion point. I mean, I think that's true about everything right now. Like, there's so little space to have a real discussion about any issue. I mean, we could have this podcast about 12 other issues we probably disagree on, and it would get us both canceled, overnight from our respective parties. So
me and the British girlfriend got into it last night about Colin Powell. But anyway, so to your point,
I want to know what that's about.
To your
were you
point,
celebrating the Iraq War anniversary, or?
No, we were talking the Iraq War, and she kept bashing Bush, and I'm like, time out. I agree, the war was a bad thing. But I will say it was not Bush. It was all of us. I mean, 60% of the Democrats in the U.S. Senate voted for it. 40% of the Democrats in the House voted for it. 72% of the Americans supported it when it happened. So it was all of us. We all made a bad decision. It was not just, George Bush making the bad decision.
I was not among that. Actually, when that was going on, this is a random detour, but around the time the Iraq War protests were gearing up, I was studying abroad in London, and I'd fallen into a sort of an anarchist commune by accident.
Oh, so
they
God,
had
the crush is even bigger.
They had occupied this building in downtown London, and it was kind of being used as a staging ground for, a bunch of anti-war protesters. So I was part of the Cooking Collective, which was basically us taking dumpster diving ingredients and cooking them into stews. Dipping. Yes, exactly. But yeah, no, I was out there. I remember what year that was, 2004, maybe, for a huge march where we had occupied the student union, and we all slept there overnight, and it was freezing. And we had built a tank in a basement of this guy's house in Brixton out of an old bed frame, and then marched around the street with a very horrible looking tank. Anyway, so it's not me. You could take me out of your equation of everybody.
Well, I mean, the simple matter of fact is the United States got attacked for the first time, and we were scared. And Saddam Hussein was actually pretending that he had nuclear weapons to hold Iran at bay. And so the stuff we saw, him moving stuff around, all that satellite surveillance that we went to the UN to, I think we actually believed that there was a nuclear bomb in there, or certain people did, or it was, we ignore that at our own peril. Holy cow, what if he actually really does have it? I do think it would have been healthier for someone to say, hey, we need more evidence than this before we're going to do this. I do have a funny story, not a funny story, but a story about the first Iraq War. So I was in Las Vegas, and it was, call it 3 or 4 weeks before the offensive was launched. and me and my ex-wife were sitting at a table with all these naval fighter pilots. And it was like 3 a.m. and they were there,
Like,
and they basically kind of fessed up, hey,
like a last hurrah.
This is our last hurrah. And then we're being shipped out to Iraq and all this. And I knew Saddam Hussein did not have a shot in the first Gulf War, because those guys were like hitting 18 and getting a 3. You know, it was like double down. Okay, boom. Yeah. So I had no worries about us winning the first war after hanging out with those guys, because they were all so badass. But
it's a long digression from energy stuff. But yeah. No.
So let's do this. Let's close up on this. One thing from you that I have to go back and tell my side and convince that your intentions are honorable and all that. What is that one thing you want me to go back and do?
Yeah, I think the big thing would be, I have no beef with oil workers. I have no beef with Chuck Yates. Like, I think there are a lot of really great people who work in the energy industry who are doing very good work, at times very physically demanding, thankless work. Like, I do expect that every morning when I wake up, my lights are going to work, and then I'm going to be able to get gas for my car. And I know that is because of the work that people in the oil and gas industry do. And so I have no problem with anybody in this industry. I think where all of my concern lies, where I think the ire of the climate movements, lies, is with, really sort of C-suite executives who over the past 40 years have made Americans believe that there's a real debate around climate change, who have blocked solutions, municipal, state, federal, international level, and have made it so much harder to address this problem than it should be, so that now we are forced into this need for a rapid, dramatic decarbonization of our entire economy over an incredibly short timeline that's going to be really, really hard, and way harder than it ever had to be because of the decisions they were making throughout my lifetime. So, hopefully just seeing the distinction between those two levels and recognizing that, like, most people in the climate movement are like me. Hopefully they don't take themselves too seriously. Hopefully they're willing to have conversations if you want to ever talk. Like, if anyone wants to DM me, if anyone wants to talk about this stuff, you can like make fun of my glasses. I don't know, whatever you want to do, just come talk to me, because, I do think there are a lot of great people in this industry who want to see change. And I think it just sucks that they're being held back by a lot of leadership, and have been held back by leadership.
So it's interesting, because you and I have kind of had that discussion before. And I think the way I've actually done some preaching on my side is, you get on my side, oh, they're trying to put us out of work, they're trying to do all that. And I go, you know what? They actually feel like they need to fight that hard and quote unquote fight dirty. And it's not because they really believe that the world's going to end tomorrow if we don't get rid of it. It's just they don't trust us. And I do think that's kind of on us. I don't think we've necessarily been the best actors. And what's really interesting, kind of bring it back to Chuck Yates Needs a Wife.
Yeah.
It's coming. We've shot like 6 hours of stuff. I've been editing all this. It'll come out at some point. But it was really interesting. So me and the girlfriend, the backdrop on that story is, she broke up with me after we've gone out 6 months. She's like, I don't even think you like me. I don't think you care, all this. And so may or may not have been clinically depressed in 2022. I like to phrase it as there was no consequence to my inaction, right?
Yeah.
I didn't put out a podcast. Nobody really cared. I half-assed that roast I did. We still raised $1 million. So that was the first time I kind of had that a consequence. So I went and thought about it. And that's what the serious side of Chuck Yates Needs a Wife is going to be, telling that story. But one of the things that's interesting about that is you realize that you get into, in relationships, you get into these cycles where I'm reacting to you, you're reacting to me. And what the psychologists will tell you is the only way to break those cycles is one person goes first and changes the environment such that the negative behavior of this person is no longer present, and then this person doesn't react. What's interesting about that dynamic is it can't just happen on one day.
Yeah.
Because this person will go, oh my gosh, this is so much better behavior, but it's uncertain, and uncertain's just bad. And it generally takes 3 to 6 months for the person to accept the new behavior of the one trying to break the cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why it's so hard as, couples walk in, and if you were just being blunt as a couples counselor, it's like, all right, who's going to go first?
Yep.
And it's going to suck. I mean, you're going to stop all your bad behavior, and it might even get worse from your spouse, or your partner and all that. And so it's interesting. So me and the girlfriend have kind of gone through that. Knock on wood, I think we've broken the cycle. I chose to go first, because she's really special and all that. But it's almost like we need to do that.
Yeah.
The oil and gas business and the environmentalists need to do it, and someone almost has to go first, so that the other side accepts, okay, there is better behavior on that side.
Yeah. Can you go first again on that? That would be great. You got more money, I think. You got more power. You can go first, and then,
You've got the narrative. You've got all the people behind you.
Yeah.
So you should go first.
I mean, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to get the people behind us, right? Like, But yeah, I think it'll be interesting, right? Because we are at this place where you do see a lot of oil companies now claim that they're like, we're in it. We're climate partners, right? They're talking the talk. And I think the response from us right now is like, we'll see. Like, we've seen you talk that talk before, but and I think that's why having some firm language on ESG matters, having these SEC disclosures matters, is because we need to see beyond the pledges, beyond the headlines, beyond the flashy slides at the conferences. Like, what is the level of commitment from this industry to actually make a change? Because if you're really dug into it, you're talking about managed decline, right? And no, I don't know what industry voluntarily enters into managed decline in human history.
Certainly not the climate movement. No, did I say that? Oh, I'm sorry. I have 3 viewers left watching the podcast at this point. So that
we
was
can,
for
we
you
can
guys.
wrap up.
That was for you guys.
No, yeah, I'm just saying, I think, my big takeaway is hopefully seeing me here. I'm definitely not scary. I'm definitely not,
you're cool.
too pretentious about anything. So it's if people want to reach out and talk climate stuff, talk energy stuff, talk solutions, leak a story to me, great. I am always willing to really talk to anybody, because I have a massive amount to learn from the oil industry to be able to do my job well, and hopefully vice versa. So,
you know what I'd love to do? And maybe we could actually do this, and we could do podcasts about it, is let's go find one example of something that's bad. And I don't know what that bad is, but something small enough where you could go research it, I could go research it, and we come up with a joint solution. You go sell your side, I'll go sell my side, and let's see if we could fix it.
Love it.
Is that a river or whatever? Just something.
Yeah.
I'll do that.
Yeah. Could start with cleaning up your beard a little bit, or
That's a long way to go on that.
No, that would be great. I'd love to do that.
It's so funny. So I go get coffee every morning in the small town I live in, Joseph's Coffee Shop, and the old guys sit over at the table, and I walk in, and one of them's always like, we could start a GoFundMe and get you a razor. you really got holes in your pants. And I always joke, I go, someone tweeted out the other day, Yates spends a lot to look this crappy.
Right.
He really does.
Yeah. So. That's a Dolly Parton, I think, had a line. It takes a lot of money to look this trashy.
This trashy. Yeah. Somebody else tweeted out, you don't dress for the job you have, you dress for the job you want. Yates took that shit to heart. So I wanted to be a 90s angsty teen. That's just kind of my jam. That's Kelly, awesome. You were cool to come on.
Yeah. No,
and it's nice to meet you in person.
It's good to meet you too. Maybe EFT won't be too mean to me on the back end of this, but remains to be seen.
Good luck with that. I'll be right there with you. They can be a little fickle.
Yeah. So. But no, this was super cool. Thanks for having me on.
Cool.
Yeah.